There are photographs that, when looked at closely, seem to capture more than just a moment. They also hide secrets that the naked eye cannot comprehend. Thomas Aldridge's wedding photograph taken in 1912 is one of them. It started out as a family keepsake, but over the years, the strange details on the groom's hands have made historians stop and wonder. Were they just ordinary signs or something beyond human understanding? When Sarah, a historical researcher, stumbles upon old diaries and letters, she begins to unravel a strange story, one where people seem bound by an ancient covenant, mysterious rituals, and abilities that modern science cannot explain. A mystery that has lasted for more than a century, hidden in the shadows of old days and in spaces invisible to the naked eye. Join us as we step into this story where history meets mystery and discover whether this photograph is just a memory or a window into another reality. In the quiet year of 1912, a wedding portrait seemed so perfect, so tender, that no one could have imagined what lingered silently within it, hidden in the groom's hands, waiting more than a century to be seen. Tonight I want to share with you a story that many historians still whisper about, a discovery that began as a simple archival task and became something far more unsettling. But before we drift deeper, let me ask you this. Have you ever looked at an old photograph and felt a soft tug of unease, as if something beneath the surface was quietly asking to be noticed? That feeling is exactly where our story begins. The autumn of 2019 settled cold and early over the small town of Millbrook, Massachusetts. Inside the softly lit archive room of the New England Historical Society, Sarah Chen, a digital archivist with a patient touch, was scanning a collection of photographs left behind by Eleanor Whitmore, who had passed away at the remarkable age of 103. Most of the images were familiar echoes of their era: stiff family portraits, grainy landscapes, fleeting slices of life. But then, Sarah paused. A wedding portrait, astonishingly well preserved, rested amid the stack. The couple stood before the altar of St. Augustine's Church, still standing today, captured in a moment of joy, frozen in time. The bride, Margaret Whitmore, wore a silk gown trimmed with delicate lace. Her smile was soft and bright, her eyes full of hope. Beside her stood the groom, Thomas Aldridge, tall and composed, one hand resting gently upon hers. "Beautiful," Sarah whispered, adjusting her glasses as she prepared the high-resolution scan. The new equipment could reveal textures and hidden details invisible to the naked eye. Sometimes these scans exposed water damage, sometimes forgotten inscriptions, and occasionally something no one was prepared for. As the machine hummed and the digital image appeared on her screen, Sarah felt the first flicker of curiosity. The photo showed almost no signs of aging, no yellowing, no fading. It was as if the picture had been kept untouched by time, preserved in a vacuum of silence. She made a note: exceptional condition, possible special storage. She zoomed in on Margaret's face, sharp and clear despite the old photographic technology. Then she examined Thomas, and that's when something shifted. His smile remained, but his eyes did not match. Instead of joy, they carried something quieter, heavier. A trace of fear, a sense of resignation, or perhaps a message too faint to understand. Sarah leaned in, unsettled. She zoomed out, letting her eyes follow the lines of Thomas's figure until they caught on a detail she had almost missed. His right hand, the one resting at his side, looked ordinary at first glance. But at high resolution, something emerged from the shadow's markings. Not tattoos. Those would have been socially scandalous for a man of his status in 1912. No, these looked like symbols. Scratches. Lines drawn or carved into the skin, arranged with purpose. Her breath caught. Jim, you need to see this. She called to her supervisor, Dr. James Morrison, a veteran historian who had spent 40 years studying New England's past. Dr. Morrison leaned in, eyebrows tightening. "Enhance it," he said quietly. As the image sharpened, the markings took shape. They weren't random wounds. They formed a deliberate pattern. 3 intersecting lines creating a twisted star with smaller symbols branching out, like roots or forgotten runes. Not accidental, not decorative, something else entirely. And in that silent room, the once perfect wedding portrait no longer felt like a memory of joy, but a doorway into a story history had never meant to reveal. The precision of the markings was unsettling. Whoever had carved them hadn't done so in haste or panic. Each line felt deliberate, placed with the kind of intention that whispered of ritual rather than accident. "I've never seen anything quite like this," Dr. Morrison murmured, pulling out a chair and lowering himself slowly as if afraid to disturb whatever secret lay inside the pixels on the screen. "The placement suggests he was trying to hide them. But why have them at all, and why carry them into your wedding day?" Sarah was already digging through the donation records, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. The photograph came from Eleanor Whitmore's estate. "Margaret's daughter," she said softly. "Born in 1916. 4 years after the wedding." She paused, absorbing the weight of that timeline. "So Margaret lived a long life after this," Dr. Morrison mused. "Then what about Thomas?" Sarah searched genealogical logs, census data, burial registries, her screen, filling with records that revealed less and less the further she looked. "And then there's no death record," she whispered. "No burial. After 1913, Thomas Aldridge just disappears." Dr. Morrison leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him. "People didn't simply vanish in 1913, he said, voice low. "Not without leaving something behind." The light in the archive dimmed to its late-day glow, stretching shadows across the room. 2 historians sat together in silence, both sensing the same truth. This perfect wedding portrait had been carrying an imperfect secret for more than a century. Sarah printed the enhanced marking and pinned it to their research board, its stark black lines looking even more ominous on paper. "I think we need to dig deeper," she said quietly, "into who Thomas Aldridge really was." Outside, the October wind rattled the window panes. Somewhere deep in the building, a door slammed, though no one else was there yet. But Sarah and Dr. Morrison didn't notice. They were already falling headlong into a mystery that would soon blur the line between documented history and whispered legend. The next morning came with an unexpected frost. Ice traced delicate patterns across the windows of the Historical Society, like nature's handwriting. Sarah hadn't slept. Questions about Thomas and those marks kept circling in her mind, never settling long enough to give her rest. She arrived early only to find Dr. Morrison already buried in old newspapers. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, placing 2 steaming cups of coffee on the table. "Not a wink," he admitted. I've been combing through the Millbrook Gazette from 1912 and 1913. Thomas appears in several issues before the wedding banker at First National, well respected. And then, after February 1913, nothing. Sarah opened the enhanced image again, the strange symbol etched into Thomas's skin. I researched these markings, she said. They don't match any cultural or religious symbols common in the era. But I found something else. She pulled up a digitized page from an 1889 journal written by Reverend Josiah Blackwood, a wandering preacher known for his grim sermons. These, she whispered, are what he called devil's marks, symbols he claimed to have seen on men and women throughout New England. The symbols in Blackwood's sketch were eerily similar to the ones on Thomas's hand. Dr. Morrison leaned closer, adjusting his glasses. The resemblance is undeniable, he said, but Blackwood was dismissed as a fanatic, practically a madman, by most people. Yes, Sarah replied gently. But what if he actually saw something real, something hidden? Before Dr. Morrison could answer, the archive door opened. In stepped Martha Hendris, the society's oldest volunteer, part historian, part storyteller, and holy keeper of local law. I heard you two were asking about the Aldridge family, she announced, settling into the nearest chair like she'd been summoned. Well, news travels fast, Dr. Morrison said, amused. What do you know about them? Martha's eyes were bright sharp, despite her 85 years. My grandmother knew Margaret, she said. A lovely woman, but always a sadness about her. Never remarried after Thomas disappeared. Disappeared, Sarah repeated softly. So people knew he vanished. Oh, yes. Martha nodded, though the family didn't talk about it openly. Officially, he went west on business and never returned. But my grandmother? She said Margaret sometimes talked in her sleep calling for Thomas, begging him to come back from the dark. A chill brushed the room. Did your grandmother ever mention anything unusual about Thomas? Before he vanished, Dr. Morrison asked. Martha hesitated. There was talk, she said slowly. There's always talk in a small town. Some claimed he took long walks in the woods at night. Others said he visited a woman who lived alone at the edge of town. Constance Gray. A strange one. People called her eccentric. Do we have any records on her? Sarah asked, already typing. She died in the 1918 influenza, Martha replied. But her house is still there, or what's left of it. That crumbling cottage off Old Post Road. Children say it's haunted. Though children say that about most abandoned places. Over the next few hours, the three of them pieced together the fragments of Thomas Aldridge's life, born in 1886 to a prosperous Boston family. Harvard educated. Arrived in Millbrook in 1910 as a rising young banker. Charming, ambitious, quickly accepted into the community. His courtship of Margaret Whitmore had been nothing short of a local fairy tale. But then, in the autumn of 1912, barely months after the wedding, things began to shift. Thomas missed work. He claimed illness. He was seen entering the woods at dusk, seen speaking with Constance Gray, and always alone. And as the shadows lengthened around their research board, one question lingered heavier than the rest. What exactly had Thomas Aldridge been drawn into? The bank's old ledgers, yellowed, fragile, and heavy with dust, revealed more than just numbers. Through the Historical Society's connections, Dr. Morrison had gained access to their archives, and what he found was quietly unnerving. In the margins of several entries where most bankers might jot notes or initials, Thomas had drawn symbols. Not once or twice, but repeatedly strange curling marks that echoed the very patterns carved into his skin. His behavior was growing erratic, Dr. Morrison murmured. Meetings cancelled. Unexplained absences. And these. He traced a finger over one symbol, careful not to touch the paper itself. It's as though something was consuming him. I found something too, Sarah said, pulling up a scanned document. From police records. January 1913. She enlarged the image, a brief, almost reluctant report about vandalism at St. Augustine's Church, the very place Thomas and Margaret had wed. Symbols had been carved into the pews, symbols nearly identical to the ones etched into Thomas's hand. Dr. Morrison exhaled slowly. He went back to the church. A pause. But for what? To confess? To warn someone? Or, he didn't finish the thought. If you're finding this investigation as intriguing as we are? Sarah thought absently, but she kept that part to herself this time, letting the mood settle heavier in the room. Martha rose, pulling her coat around her shoulders. If you want to know more about Thomas Aldridge, she said, visit the church. Father O'Brien is young, but he keeps all the old records. She hesitated in the doorway. And ask him about the sealed crypt beneath the sanctuary. The one they discovered in the 1960s. The door creaked shut behind her, leaving Sarah and Dr. Morrison in the soft hum of the archive room. The wedding photograph still glowed on the monitor. Margaret smiling gently, Thomas standing beside her with secrets carved into his flesh. We need a plan, Dr. Morrison said finally. Tomorrow, St. Augustine's. After that, Constance Gray's cottage. We follow this wherever it leads. Sarah nodded, but a whisper of dread pooled in her stomach. Some mysteries, she felt, were buried for a reason. As she packed her things, she made one last search. A small detail easily overlooked. Thomas and Margaret had no recorded children in 1913 or 1914. Eleanor, Margaret's daughter, was born in 1916, 3 years after Thomas disappeared, and on her birth certificate, the line for father was left blank. Jim Sarah called softly. There's something else. Eleanor Whitmore. She wasn't Thomas's daughter. Dr. Morrison froze in the doorway. Then the question becomes, what happened during those missing years? And why did Margaret keep that photograph for the rest of her life? Outside, twilight deepened. They locked the doors of the Historical Society and stepped into the quiet street, never noticing the dark figure watching from across the road. Waiting. Patient. As though it had been waiting for more than a century. Morning came reluctantly, the sun smothered by heavy clouds. St. Augustine's Church rose ahead of them, tall and solemn, its Gothic spires cutting through the grey sky like warning fingers. Father O'Brien greeted them with a firm handshake. Young, bright-eyed, but with the weary expression of someone who had read too many parish journals filled with things better forgotten. Martha called ahead, he said, ushering them into the dim sanctuary. She said, you were researching the Aldridge family. I've gathered some records. Colored shafts of light from stained glass windows fell across the floor. like fragmented memories, scenes of salvation, mingled with scenes of damnation. Their steps echoed as Father O'Brien led them to a small office behind the altar. The church keeps extensive documentation, he explained, setting out leather-bound volumes. Baptisms, marriages, deaths, and occasionally more unusual matters. Sarah showed him the enhanced photograph. The change in his expression was instant. A tightening around the eyes, a flicker of recognition. "You've seen these symbols," Dr. Morrison said quietly. Father O'Brien nodded. During renovations in 1963, workers discovered a sealed crypt beneath the sanctuary. The walls were covered with markings like these. The church ordered it closed again, but photographs were taken before the seal was restored. He unlocked a drawer and produced a manila folder. Inside were black and white photos of a stone chamber, its walls etched with symbols that spiraled and twisted just like those on Thomas's hand, only far more numerous, more violent. "And there's more," Father O'Brien said. The workers found remains, not in a coffin, scattered, as though something or someone wanted them kept from being whole. A cold shiver crawled down Sarah's spine. The bones were dated to the early 1900s, he continued. The church had them cremated quietly. Then he laid another document on the table. Charred pages from a journal. Most of the writing was lost, but enough remained to twist the air in the room. "The bargain cannot be undone. She promises power. But the cost, Margaret must never know. The marks burn even now. Constance says there is a way, but I fear. Darkness calls and I answer. Forgive me, my love. By the time you read this, I will be beyond. The church may hold me, but it cannot contain what I have become." Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth. This is Thomas's handwriting, Dr. Morrison whispered. He was trying to stop something, or stop himself. Father O'Brien lowered his voice. "There are legends, you know, of a group that met in the Millbrook Woods in the early 1900s. Seekers of hidden knowledge. Constance Gray was their leader. They were said to practice rituals, bargains with things the church has no name for. He led them to the back pews. This is where the vandalism occurred in 1913. Thomas carved the symbols here. Sarah ran her fingers along the polished wood. She imagined Thomas alone in the dark church, carving desperately. To warn, to beg for help, to sever a bond he could no longer bear. "Can we see the crypt?" Dr. Morrison asked. Father O'Brien shook his head. "No one is allowed inside." A pause. "But I can tell you what else the workers found." He leaned close. There were scratches on the inside of the ceiling stones, as though something tried to claw its way out. They left the church in silence, driving to the outskirts of town. The old post road was nearly swallowed by forest. When the car could go no farther, they walked. Constance Gray's cottage appeared through the trees like a half-remembered nightmare roof, collapsed vines strangling the walls, stones sinking into the earth. But the stone foundation still held, and carved into its cornerstone were the symbols. Familiar now, too familiar. "She marked this place," Sarah whispered. Inside the cottage felt colder than the air outside. The remains of a stone circle lay in the floor, purpose uncertain, but undeniably deliberate. Sarah Dr. Morrison called from a back chamber. She joined him, finding words carved into a decaying wall, barely visible beneath layers of rot and time. Thomas A. The compact is sealed. Payment comes due at the turning of the season. What is given cannot be returned. Below it, in different jagged handwriting, he thinks love will save him. He is wrong. The old ones do not forgive broken promises. Sarah photographed the wall, her hands trembling, not from the cold. The rational explanation that Thomas had simply fallen in with a cult, that guilt or a deteriorating mind had driven him to flee, felt increasingly inadequate. Nothing they were uncovering fit neatly into psychology or folklore. Each discovery only deepened the sense that they were brushing against something far older, far darker. As they prepared to leave Constance Gray's ruined cottage, Dr. Morrison stopped abruptly. "Do you hear that?" Sarah froze. At first, she heard only the forest. Then beneath the normal sounds came something else, a rhythmic creaking, like an old sign swaying in the wind. Except the air was completely still. They followed the sound to a cluster of ancient oaks behind the cottage. There, hanging from a massive branch, was the remnant of a wooden board, so decayed its lettering had long since vanished. But carved into the living bark of the oak were symbols, those same impassable markings, and beneath them a date, February 13th, 1913. The day before Valentine's Day. The day before Thomas disappeared. Sarah felt her skin tighten. Nothing about this was random. On the drive back to town, her phone buzzed with a message from Martha Hendris. "Found something you need to see. Elela Nena Whitmore's diary. Come quickly." The road out of the woods seemed longer than before, the trees pressing in from all sides. Neither of them spoke. Both felt the same tightening dread. They were digging up something that had been intentionally buried, perhaps for very good reason. Back at the Historical Society, Martha waited with a small leather-bound book wrapped in linen. Elela Nena Whitmore's diary. She placed it on the table with a gravity that made Sarah's breath catch. What new truth or new horror waited inside? The journal fragments suggested both desperation and warning. Thomas had been trying to escape something, yet also trying to speak to whoever might find his traces. "Can we see the sealed crypt?" Dr. Morrison asked quietly. Father O'Brien shook his head. The bishop's orders were very clear. It remains closed. But then he glanced around the dim sanctuary, as if making sure no one else was listening. "I can tell you what the workers found inside, though. Before it was resealed." He hesitated. There were scratches on the inside of the ceiling stones, as if something had clawed upward, trying to get out. A stillness fell over the room. Even the colored light from the stained glass windows seemed to dim. After leaving the church, Sarah and Dr. Morrison drove in heavy silence toward the outskirts of town. The old post road, long abandoned, wound into the woods like a forgotten scar. Nature had begun reclaiming it, choking it with roots, shadows, and silence. They parked where the road dissolved into underbrush and continued on foot. Constance Gray's cottage rose through the trees like the memory of a nightmare. What little remained was wrapped thick in vines. The roof had collapsed long ago. Walls sagged like the ribs of some great creature left to rot. And yet, the stone foundation still held firm, Carved into its cornerstone were the same strange symbols. She marked her territory. Sarah whispered, raising her camera with trembling hands. They moved carefully through the ruins. In what had once been the main room, they found a stone circle set into the floor. Deliberate, precise, crafted with a purpose that the decades had failed to erase. No one said it aloud, but both understood rituals had been performed here. "Look at this," Dr. Morrison called. Sarah stepped into what had once been a back room. Faint words etched nearly a century earlier clung to the crumbling plaster. Tomase. The compact is sealed. Payment comes due at the turning of the season. What is given cannot be returned. Beneath it, in different handwriting, he thinks love will save him. He is wrong. The old ones do not forgive broken promises. Sarah photographed every word, though her hands shook. Suddenly, even the rational explanation that Thomas had joined a cult, that guilt and fear had devoured his sanity, felt hollow. Too small, too human. They had almost reached the door when Dr. Morrison froze. "Do you hear that?" Sarah held her breath. The forest murmured softly. And then she heard it too, a slow, rhythmic creaking, like a wooden sign swaying back and forth. But the air around them was utterly still. They followed the sound to a cluster of ancient oaks behind the cottage. Hanging from a thick branch was the shredded remnant of an old sign, its lettering erased by time, and carved deep into the bark as if by desperate hands were more symbols, and beneath them, February 13th, 1913, the day before Valentine's Day, Sarah murmured. The day Thomas disappeared. As they walked back to the car, Sarah's phone buzzed a message from Martha Hendris. "Found something you need to see. Elila Nina Whitmore's diary. Come quickly." The forest seemed darker on the return journey. The shadows longer. Neither historian spoke because both were thinking the same thing. Some secrets stay buried for a reason. Back at the Historical Society, Martha waited with a small leather journal. "Elena gave this to me years ago," she said softly. "Asked me to keep it safe. She never said why. Until now." Sarah opened the diary with care. Most entries were simple grocery lists, weather notes, quiet thoughts of a woman living an ordinary New England life. But one entry dated October 31st, 1962, stopped her cold. "Mother is dying. In her fever, she speaks of father, not the man who raised me, but Thomas. She says he came back once, in 1916, the night I was conceived. She says he wasn't human anymore, but she loved him still. She says, I have his eyes. When I look in the mirror, I wonder, what did she see? My eyes are normal. Aren't they? Aren't they?" Dr. Morrison sank into a chair. "This suggests Thomas returned. 3 years after disappearing, but returned as what Sarah whispered, even though part of her already feared the answer." Martha folded her hands. "My grandmother said Margaret Aldridge never took off her wedding ring. She always said she was waiting for her husband to come home. Maybe he did. Just not in a way anyone expected." Night fell around, the archives swallowing the windows in darkness. The three of them sat surrounded by papers, photographs, and fragments of a story that no longer fit into the safety of history. On Sarah's monitor, the wedding photograph glowed faintly. But now, The markings on Thomas's hand felt less like symbols and more like a warning. His final attempt to record the horror overtaking him. And somewhere in the darkness outside, something waited. Something that had been waiting for more than 100 years. The next morning did little to lift the heaviness pressing over Millbrook. Sarah arrived early, but Dr. Morrison was already there, and he wasn't alone. A woman in her 60s stood beside him, her eyes startlingly amber studying the glowing photograph. Sarah, Dr. Morrison said, voice tight. This is Patricia Aldridge Morrison, Eleanor's daughter, my cousin. Patricia gave a weary smile. When James told me what you uncovered, I knew it was time. I've carried this burden long enough. She placed a worn leather satchel on the table. Inside were photographs, letters tied with ribbon, and a journal bound in a dark material that didn't quite look like leather. My mother left these to me, Patricia said. She wanted them destroyed. I couldn't bring myself to do it, but I hid them. All these years, Sarah examined the photographs first. Margaret Aldridge appeared in each young, older-aged, but always with a deepening sorrow in her eyes. And in several images taken in the 1920s and 30s, odd distortions hovered around the edges. Shadows where no shadows should be. My grandmother claimed she could feel him, Patricia whispered. Thomas. She said he never really left, that he lived in the spaces between light and darkness. Sometimes, the photographs caught him. Dr. Morrison lifted one picture dated 1925. Margaret sat in a garden, but behind her, just at the margin, was a faint shape, a blur, or perhaps a figure standing very still. The longer Sarah stared, the less she believed it was accidental. This journal, Patricia said, touching the dark cover, belonged to Thomas. Grandmother found it when she broke into the crypt in 1916. She paused as their faces registered shock. Yes. She broke the church seal. She was desperate. Sarah opened the journal. Thomas's handwriting spiraled across the pages, frantic unraveling, documenting the terrible price of the knowledge he had sought. December 3rd, 1912. The ceremony was as Constance promised. I felt the veil thin. I saw truths beyond science, but something saw me too. It knows my name now. December 15th, 1912. The marks appeared overnight. They burn ice and fire together. Constance says they're a blessing. I know better. They are chains. January the 8th, 1913. Margaret suspects nothing. How can I tell her the truth that I am becoming something else? That I am being hollowed out? January the 20th, 1913. Tried to break the compact. Constance laughed. The old ones do not release their servants. I feel myself slipping, becoming a vessel. February 10th, 1913. 3 days left. The final change comes soon. Better to die as Thomas than live as their thing. The church crypt has protections. Old ones. If I seal myself inside, February 13th, 1913. This is my last entry as a man. The pages were filled with Thomas's handwriting, once steady, now slipping into frantic spirals as if the ink itself trembled with the weight of what he had seen. Each entry traced his descent deeper into Constance Gray's circle and into the terrible cost of the knowledge they had sought. December 3rd, 1912. The ceremony was everything Constance promised. I felt the veil between worlds grow thin, saw truths that mathematics and science could never reveal. But something saw me too. It knows my name now, December 15th, 1912. The marks appeared overnight. They burn like ice and fire at once. Constance says they are a sign of favor, but I see chains binding me to promises I never understood. January the 8th, 1913. Margaret suspects nothing. Sweet, innocent Margaret. How could I tell her her husband is becoming something else? That something ancient and hungry is hollowing me out. January the 20th, 1913. I tried to break the compact. Constance laughed. She said the old ones don't let their servants go. The change quickens. I feel myself slipping. Less Thomas, now more vessel. February 10th, 1913. 3 days left. Constance says the final change comes on the anniversary of the binding. I've made my choice. Better to die as Thomas than live as their creation. The church crypt holds old protections, older than the priests realize. If I seal myself inside, February 13th, 1913. This is my last entry as a man. The hunger grows. I hear them calling. But I will not answer. Margaret, if you find this no, I loved you more than my own soul. The thing I'm becoming would wear my face, but it would not be me. Remember me as I was not, as what I might become. Sarah's breath caught as she turned the final page. The next entry, written 3 years later, was in a different hand. Cruder, uneven. As if the writer barely remembered how to form letters. February 14th, 1916. Found way back. Not man, not thing. Between. Margaret knows. Still loves. Child will be bridge. Old ones patient. Time nothing. Thomas sleeps. I wake. We are one. We are none. The compact continues. Patricia spoke softly, almost reverently. My mother was conceived on Valentine's Day, 1916, 3 years after Thomas disappeared. She withdrew a letter, its paper brittle with age. Margaret's delicate script trembled across the page. My dearest sister. You will think me mad, but I must tell someone. He came back, not as he was, but as something between states. For one night, the man I married looked through those changed eyes, spoke with that altered voice. He begged my forgiveness. What we created that night was born of love. And something else, something older than love itself. Elena carries both bloodlines. Sometimes I see it, the amber flash in her eyes that belong to neither my family nor his. I pray the inheritance passes her by. But if it doesn't, it is not evil. It is evolution. He couldn't stay. The morning light drove him back into the spaces between. But he watches. I feel him in the shadows, in the pause between heartbeats. My wedding ring grows cold when he is near, and I welcome that chill. Forgive me for burdening you, but someone must know. For Eleanor's sake, your loving sister, Margaret. Dr. Morrison looked shaken. Patricia, are you saying your family carries something otherworldly? Patricia's amber eyes seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights. Yes, most of us show only subtle signs, strange dreams, unusual sensitivity to certain places. Eyes that catch the light wrong. Sarah watched her more closely. The shadows around Patricia bent oddly, as if reluctant to touch her. Even her reflection in the computer monitor lagged a heartbeat behind her movements. My son Patricia continued, showed stronger signs at 13. He saw things others couldn't. knew things he shouldn't. We taught him to hide it. Now he lives in Alaska. The cold quiets the other side. Sarah swallowed. Why tell us now? Because the compact Thomas made isn't finished. Constance Gray may be dead, but what she served doesn't die. And something is waking. The old markers are resurfacing. She gestured to the wedding photograph. That picture wasn't donated by accident. Someone wanted it found. As if summoned by her words, the lights flickered. The air thinned into cold. Sarah's breath misted. On the monitor, the wedding photograph stirred. Shadows deepened. Shifted. Moved. He's here, Patricia whispered. He always comes when the family's truth is spoken. Thomas's shape sharpened, yet grew impossibly distorted. His human form layered with something that existed in too many dimensions for the eye to hold. Behind him, figures materialized. Constance Gray, her followers caught between moments still watching. Then, as quickly as it came, the vision collapsed. The photograph stilled. The warmth returned. But the truth lingered. Patricia gathered her belongings. Investigate if you must. But remember, some doors once opened never truly close. Thomas learned that too late. She left a small silver locket on the table. Inside was a tiny portrait of the wedding image, and a lock of hair that shimmered strangely black in one angle, silver in another, and at times neither color at all. She wore it always, Patricia murmured. Said it helped her remember who he was and accept who he became. After she left, Sarah and Dr. Morrison sat in silence. Everything they thought they knew about history now felt thin, fragile, like skin stretched over something deep and restless. What do we do? Sarah whispered. We document truth, Dr. Morrison said, quietly. But perhaps some truths are too heavy to share. They didn't notice the photograph shifting again subtly, an ancient awareness awakening in Thomas's eyes, watching, waiting. A week later, Sarah stood alone in Millbrook Cemetery at dusk. She carried a folder of everything they had uncovered, unsure if she sought answers or closure. Margaret Aldridge's grave rested beneath an old elm. The epitaph read, "Love transcends all boundaries." Beside it stood a second stone. Thomas James Aldridge, 1886 until we meet again. No date of death. Only a promise. On the base of the stones, Sarah noticed faint carving symbols she now recognized, worn but persistent, as if refusing to be forgotten. I thought you might be here. Sarah turned. An elderly man approached, steady gait, an amber glint in his eyes that made her breath catch. You're Patricia's son? She said softly. He nodded. David Aldridge. I came from Alaska when my mother told me what you'd found. There are things you need to know, things she never understood. They walked together among the graves as the last light slipped away, and the air grew still around them, quiet, expectant, as if the past itself were listening. The change isn't a curse. He began softly, as though speaking too loudly might disturb something ancient lingering in the air around them. It's an evolution. Thomas discovered something that night with Constance Gray, something that suggested humanity has been standing at a threshold all along. We can remain as we are confined by the narrow walls of a single dimension, or we can become something more. But at what cost? Sarah whispered. That he murmured is the question, isn't it? Thomas believed he was losing his humanity. In truth, he was gaining far more awareness of realities layered beside and beneath their own, the ability to exist in several states of being at once. But the process was terrifying. Imagine suddenly seeing with 1,000 eyes, thinking with a mind stretched across dimensions. Most would go mad beneath the weight of it. They stopped at a mausoleum near the back of the cemetery. David produced an old iron key that seemed too cold for his hand to warm. This belonged to Constance Gray's family, he said quietly. After she died, my grandmother acquired it. She knew others would someday come searching for Constance's work. Inside the walls were covered with documents, photographs, artifacts, an entire hidden archive chronicling the occult history of Millbrook. Sarah felt her breath catch. My God! She whispered, her voice swallowed by the stone walls. Thomas tried to resist because he didn't understand. David said, lighting a lantern that cast long, wavering shadows. He thought it was corruption, a violation. But look, he handed her a journal in Constance's elegant script, dated 1910. The old ones aren't gods or demons, her writing declared. They are what we will one day become. They reached this state eons ago and wait patiently for us to join them. The rituals, the marks, the bargains, they are catalysts, nothing more. But fear twists the journey. Sarah studied the photographs pinned to the wall faces, marked with the same strange symbols Thomas bore. All dated between 1900 and 1920. Dozens of them. Some had fled Millbrook when the change began. Some tried to fight it. Others embraced it entirely. David pointed to a photograph of a woman whose face seemed to exist in multiple exposures at once. She mastered it, shifted between states as easily as breathing. She lived until 1987. Though lived might not be the right word, he guided Sarah deeper into the mausoleum to a section colder and older than the rest. Atop a stone pedestal sat an ornate box. This, David whispered, is why I truly brought you here. Mother doesn't know it exists. Grandmother left it to me with instructions to open it only when the time was right. Inside was another photograph, Thomas and Margaret's wedding portrait. But this one moved, shifted, revealed the truth beneath the illusion of stillness. Sarah watched the wedding unfold with impossible clarity, saw moments between moments, and saw Thomas's hand as he placed the ring on Margaret's finger. The marks were already there, glowing faintly, with a light that wasn't light at all. Not wounds, not brands, apertures, openings. This is a dimensional photograph, David explained. Constance created only a few. They show reality as the evolved, see-it-all states at once. Sarah saw the wedding guests, some human, some almost human. She saw Constance Gray in the back row, her form shifting between an elderly woman and something geometric impossible. And Thomas. His expression wasn't fear as Sarah had always assumed. It was awe and terrible knowing. He understood even then, David said gently. The marks appeared the night before the wedding. He could have run, but he loved Margaret. He hoped love could anchor him. Did it? Sarah asked softly. David smiled bittersweet. Yes and no. Love tethered him longer than most. But eventually the pull became too strong. He exists now in the spaces between spaces, watching over his bloodline, waiting. Waiting? For what? For us to be ready. For humanity to accept that evolution isn't biological or technological. It's dimensional. We're caterpillars terrified of becoming butterflies because our caterpillar minds cannot imagine thinking in any other way. Sarah's thoughts spun. Reality felt suddenly fragile. Why show me this? Why now? Because the barriers are thinning? David said, his amber eyes glinting. More people are being marked. More are seeing shadows that don't belong to this world. The old ones are stirring. Humanity is approaching a threshold. He handed her a small leather journal. Thomas's final gift. His handwriting was steady, calm. To those who seek truth in the shadows, love transcends dimensions. Fear imprisons. The marks are keys. We are all becoming more than ourselves. As Sarah read, the mausoleum around her shifted. The walls grew permeable, shimmering. Through them, she glimpsed other times, other places, other beings, transformed ones who had embraced what Thomas had resisted. They were not monstrous, only further along. Do you see them? David asked. She nodded, unable to speak. The photograph will surface again, he said. Each discovery thins the veil. One day, human and evolved will be the same. Outside Millbrook looked different. She could see the spaces between buildings, the moments between seconds. The effect faded, but the knowing did not. What do I do now? She whispered. Whatever feels right, David replied. Share it or hide it. Prepare the world or let it find its own way. But you will never see reality the same way again. He walked away, and for a heartbeat, Sarah saw him as he truly was. Existing in layered states, part man, part something luminous and mathematical. Then he was simply an old man fading into the cemetery shadows. Sarah stood alone, the wedding photograph warm in her hand. Later, when Patricia visited the archive and spoke of the family legends, how Margaret always knew, how she said it helped her remember Thomas as he was and accept him as he became. Sarah realized how deep this story ran. How much had always been quietly understood. When Patricia left, Sarah and Dr. Morrison sat in stunned silence. What do we do with this? Sarah asked. We're historians, Dr. Morrison said softly. We document truth, even the strange. But perhaps some truths are heavier than the world is ready to bear. Neither noticed that the photograph on the screen had begun to shift once more. Subtle, patient. In Thomas's eyes, something ancient stirred. A week later, Sarah found herself in Millbrook Cemetery, once more the investigation's entire file tucked beneath her arm. She wasn't sure whether she sought answers or closure. Margaret's grave was simple, elegant. Love transcends all boundaries, her stone said. Beside it, an empty plot bore another marker, Thomas James Aldrich, 1886. Until we meet again. And as the evening light thinned into shadow, Sarah wondered. Was again closer than any of them realized. The absence of a death date on Thomas's grave felt heavier now, more ominous. knowing what Sarah had learned. Kneeling beside Margaret's grave, she pressed the flowers into the earth, her gaze lingering on the base of the stones. Weathered, nearly forgotten, were small symbols carved into the foundation of both headstones, the same marks that had set her on this long, strange journey. A slow shuffle of feet drew her attention. An elderly man approached his gate, steady despite age. And then she saw it, the amber flash in his eyes catching the last rays of fading light, and her heart skipped. "You're Patricia's son," she said, not a question but a recognition. A sad smile tugged at his lips. "David Aldrich. I heard you've been investigating our family's history. I returned from Alaska when my mother told me. There are things you need to know. Things even she doesn't fully understand." They walked among the graves, the air, cold, still, and heavy with unseen weight. His voice carried an otherworldly resonance, sending shivers down her spine. "The change isn't a curse," he said gently. "It's an evolution." That night, Thomas discovered with Constance Gray that humanity stands at a threshold. We can remain as we are confined by a single dimension, or we can become something more. But at what cost? Sarah swallowed. "That's the question, isn't it?" "Yes," he murmured. Thomas believed he was losing himself. In truth, he was gaining far more. Awareness beyond our narrow perception. The ability to exist in multiple states at once. But the process, it is terrifying. Imagine seeing with 1,000 eyes, thinking with a mind that spans dimensions. Most go mad. They paused at a mausoleum in the back of the cemetery. David produced an old iron key. This belonged to Constance Gray's family. After she died, my grandmother bought it. She knew others would come seeking her work. Inside the walls were lined with documents, photographs, and artifacts, a hidden archive of Millbrook's occult history. Sarah could barely breathe. My God. David lifted a journal, its pages filled with Constance's precise handwriting, dated 1910. The old ones aren't gods, not demons. They are what we will become. Eons ago they reached this state and wait patiently. Rituals marks bargains. They are catalysts for evolution. Fear makes it painful. Thomas feared. And so he suffered. Constance wasn't evil. She was a visionary glimpsing humanity's future, but underestimated the terror that awaits the unprepared. Photographs covered one wall, faces marked as Thomas's dated 1900 to 1920. Most fled Millbrook. Some resisted the change. A few embraced it fully. David pointed to a woman whose face seemed to exist in multiple exposures at once. She learned to shift between states at will. She lived, though lived wasn't quite the word, until 1987. He led Sarah deeper into a colder, older section. On a stone pedestal rested an ornate box. "This is why I brought you here," he whispered. "Mother doesn't know. Grandmother entrusted it to me with instructions to open it when the time was right." Inside lay a photograph, Thomas and Margaret's wedding portrait. But this one moved. It shifted, revealing the truth beneath the still image. Sarah watched the wedding day unfold in impossible detail. Moments between moments, Thomas's hand placing the ring, the marks glowing not as wounds, but apertures, openings to something greater. "This is a dimensional photograph," David explained. "Constance created a few. They show reality as the evolved, perceive it all states simultaneously." Sarah's eyes widened. She saw the wedding guests, some human, some not quite, Constance Gray in the back row, shifting between elderly woman and impossible geometric form. Thomas's expression wasn't fear but awe and terrible understanding. He knew even then. The marks appeared the night before the wedding. David continued. He could have fled, called it off, but he loved Margaret. He hoped love would anchor him to humanity. Did it? Sarah asked softly. Yes. And no, David said, voice heavy. Love tethered him longer than most. But eventually the pull was too strong. He exists now in the spaces between spaces, watching his bloodline waiting. Waiting for what? For us to be ready. Humanity must accept. The next step is not technological, not biological, it is dimensional. We're caterpillars afraid of butterflies, unable to imagine minds beyond our own. Sarah felt her reality crumble. Why show me this? Why now? Because the barriers are thinning. David said, amber eyes catching the lantern light. More are being marked. More see shadows not of this world. The old ones stir. Humanity nears a threshold. We need historians, seekers of truth to help others understand. This is not horror, it is transformation. He handed her a leather journal. Thomas's final gift. Given to my grandmother in 1962, the last time he fully materialized. Instructions, warnings, hope. Sarah opened it. The handwriting was steady, patient. To those who seek truth in the shadows, love transcends dimensions, fear imprisons. What seems monstrous is misunderstood. The marks I bear are keys. Each opens a door beyond human limitation. I was afraid. Learn from my mistake. When your time comes, embrace the change. I watch from the spaces between. I am not lost. I am transformed. Margaret knows this. Our love endures. To my descendants, you are bridges between what was and what will be. Fear not your inheritance. You are evolution's ambassadors. The mausoleum itself seemed to shift. Walls less solid, more permeable. Glimpses of other times, other spaces. Figures moving once human, now transformed. Do you see them? David asked. Sarah nodded, speechless. The evolved. The ones who embraced what Thomas feared. They are not monsters, he said. They are what waits beyond the cocoon of perception. The photograph will surface again. Each discovery weakens the barriers, prepares humanity. One day, the human and the evolved will be the same. Outside, Millbrook looked different. She could see the spaces between buildings, moments between seconds. The effect faded, but the memory remained. What do I do now? She asked. David smiled. Whatever feels right. Share it or keep it secret. Prepare others or let them find it themselves. But you've been touched by a greater reality. You will never see the world the same way again. He walked away. For a moment, Sarah saw him as he truly was, existing in multiple states, part human, part luminous mathematical. Then he was an old man fading into shadows. Alone among the graves, holding the wedding photograph, she understood why it had survived a century. It wasn't just a photograph, it was a window, a promise, a warning, and an invitation all at once. The marks on Thomas's hands no longer seemed sinister. They were not curses, not warnings. They were the future of humanity written in flesh. A transformation that could not be stopped, only feared or embraced. As Sarah walked back to her car, a sense of resolve settled over her. The world was not ready for the full truth, but perhaps it could handle fragments. She would write the historical article, include the mysterious marks, and let others draw their own conclusions. She would plant seeds of understanding for the changes yet to come. But tonight, she would go home. She would look at her own hands in the mirror, wondering if she might see the first faint traces of those marks appearing. She would wonder if Thomas, Constance, and all the evolved ones were watching from their spaces between spaces, waiting patiently for humanity to join them in the greater reality. The wedding photograph remained in the archives, innocent and beautiful and terrible. Somewhere in dimensions folded beyond human perception, Thomas Aldrich smiled, knowing that love had transcended all boundaries, even those between human and what comes after. The compact continued. The evolution proceeded. And in Millbrook, Massachusetts, the barriers grew ever so slightly thinner with each passing day. What began as a routine archival discovery had led Sarah down a path that challenged everything she thought she knew about reality. The marks on Thomas Aldrich's hands remain a mystery. Were they symbols of an otherworldly compact, signs of humanity's next evolutionary step, or something entirely beyond our comprehension? Perhaps the most unsettling part is that we may never know for certain. Have you ever encountered a photograph, a diary, or an artifact that seemed to hide more than it revealed? Share your thoughts and theories. Perhaps one day, the truth will reveal itself, or perhaps it will always remain folded in the spaces between. Remember, sometimes the most innocent-looking photographs hide the darkest secrets. And sometimes what we fear as darkness is simply a reality our eyes are not yet evolved enough to see. Until next time, keep questioning what you see. Because history is never quite what it seems.